Go on then. Start her up. The voice carried a slick, condescending amusement, the kind only a young officer fully convinced of his own importance could muster. Captain Davis waved a dismissive hand toward the A-10 Thunderbolt II, its squat, formidable frame resting on the scorching tarmac. Show us how it's done, old-timer. Roger Bentley, 82, said nothing. He stood beside the aircraft's massive front landing gear, his hand brushing lightly against the cool rubber of the tire. The sun beat down on the flight line, making the air shimmer over the concrete. Despite the heat, he wore a faded leather jacket, cracked and worn from decades of use. A small group of young airmen taking a break during the base's annual family day had gathered nearby. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene as a senior citizen was mocked or remain silent out of respect for rank. Davis smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. Come on now. You were telling my guys here all about the good old days, how you used to fly these things by instinct. Surely you remember how to flip a few switches. He gestured toward the complex array of instruments visible through the A-10's bubble canopy. Or is all that newfangled glass too much for you? Roger's eyes, the color of faded sky, stayed locked on the aircraft. He wasn't focused on the cockpit. He was studying the nose beneath the canopy, where the paint showed signs of wear. He was looking at the massive 7-barreled muzzle of the Gu-8 Avenger cannon, the weapon that defined the plane. A weapon he knew better than the faces of some of his own relatives. He could almost feel the bone-jarring vibration of it firing, a memory that he lived it not in his mind but in his bones. Captain, one of the younger airmen started, a hint of hesitation in his voice, maybe we should just stay out of it. Airman, Davis snapped, not taking his eyes off Roger, the man wants to tell war stories. He should be able to back them up. What's the matter, Grandpa? Forgot which key goes in the ignition. He chuckled at his own remark. A few others shifted uneasily, the silence around them heavier than the humid air. The captain stepped closer, his shadow stretching over Roger. He jabbed a thumb at a worn patch on Roger's jacket, a crudely drawn scorpion encircled by sand. What's that supposed to be? Your VFW bingo team? Roger's gaze finally lifted from the plane to the captain. He didn't look angry. He didn't look humiliated. He looked tired. He studied the captain's polished boots, crisply ironed flight suit, and the gleaming silver bars on his collar. He saw a man in uniform, yet unaware of the cost it carried. A man who looked at a living legend and saw only a nuisance. The auxiliary power unit requires a ground check before ignition sequence, Roger said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp, addressing the plane more than the captain. Hydraulic pressure needs to be stable at 3,000 psi. You don't just turn a key. The technical precision of Roger's statement briefly unsettled Davis. But his smirk returned quickly. Oh, we've got a real expert here. Look, sir, this is a restricted area. The aircraft is a static display for the event. I'm going to have to ask you to step away and let my team get back to work. He shifted his tone, adopting the slow, exaggerated cadence of someone speaking to a child or an elderly person he deemed incapable of understanding. This is a very expensive, very dangerous airplane. We can't have civilians climbing all over it. Roger's hand fell from the tire. His posture didn't change, but an unshakable stillness settled over him, the calm that comes before a storm. He had been a guest of the base commander, invited to family day as one of the wing's original pilots. He had wandered out to the flight line simply to be near the machine that had been his partner. He had carried his shield and weapon through the most harrowing days of his life, yet he hadn't spoken to anyone, until Davis's young airman approached him, genuinely curious about his jacket. Davis intervened, his ego flaring at the sight of his subordinates giving attention to what he saw as a mere relic. I'm not a civilian, Roger said quietly. Davis let out a short, incredulous laugh. Right, and I'm the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Sir, I'm not going to ask twice. My patience is thin. Show me your visitor pass and then return to the public area. The demand was blunt, a clear insult implying that Roger was an unescorted stranger wandering onto the active flight line. The crowd had grown. Families and other personnel, drawn by the confrontation, watched from a respectful distance. The scene was stark. The young, sharp-edged captain, gleaming with authority, facing an older man, worn and weathered like the leather on his back, standing before one of the deadliest ground attack aircraft ever built. Davis enjoyed the attention, viewing it as simply enforcing regulations and putting a confused old man in his place. He had no idea he was standing on sacred ground, in the presence of someone revered in this church of steel and fire. To Davis, this was just an old man, not the ghost of a 20-something major who had flown this very plane through skies filled with anti-aircraft fire, hands steady on the controls while the world outside erupted in flame and thunder. "You want to see my credentials?" Roger asked, his voice calm but firm. The voice was still low but now carried a sharp edge. "That's exactly what I want," Davis said, folding his arms. "Show me some ID. Show me the pass that lets you get this close to a United States Air Force asset." Roger slowly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, deliberate and unhurried. He wasn't pulling out a wallet. Davis's confident smirk wavered, replaced by a brief flicker of doubt. What could this older man possibly have that would shift the balance here? For a moment, a paranoid thought crossed the captain's mind. Could this be a security threat? Instinctively, he moved a hand closer to where a sidearm would be if he were security police. "Empty your pockets slowly," Davis ordered. The crowd murmured. What had started as casual mockery had become a tense standoff. The young airman who had tried to step in earlier now looked pale. He realized the situation was escalating far beyond control. As Roger's hand emerged from his jacket, Davis's gaze followed it intently. But it wasn't what Roger held that mattered. It was the patch on his jacket, the one Davis had just mocked. The faded scorpion, stitched in sand-colored thread, seemed to shift in the light. In Roger's mind, the oppressive heat of the tarmac vanished. It was replaced by the biting chill of a high-altitude cockpit. The murmurs of the crowd faded, replaced by the high-pitched whine of two General Electric turbojet engines and the crackle of the radio inside his helmet. The world around him wasn't a calm air base, it was a chaotic desert valley, a kill zone crawling with enemy armor. Through his targeting pod, he could see Republican Guard T-72s dug in, lying in wait to ambush a column of American light infantry. The radio screamed with urgency. A young, panicked voice cried out, "Any air support in the area? This is Ranger 6 Actual. We are pinned down, taking heavy fire. We are being overrun." Roger's thumb pressed the trigger stud on his control stick. Instantly, the world outside vanished, replaced by the violent roar of the Avenger cannon. A solid stream of 30mm depleted uranium shells erupted, a fire hose of molten metal slamming into the earth. The ground exploded. Tank turrets were ripped apart. The memory wasn't visual, it was physical. The aircraft bucking beneath him. The sharp, acrid smell of burnt propellant filling the cockpit. The grim satisfaction of watching threats to the men on the ground vanish in explosions of black smoke. He recalled the flash of a surface-to-air missile, the violent jolt against his right wing, and the frantic movements on the rudder pedals to keep the damaged plane aloft. That day he had earned the patch, not a unit insignia but a gift. A life debt, repaid by a grateful army captain who insisted he owed his life and the lives of his men to the Warthog that had descended like an angry god. His attention returned to the present, Captain Davis's arrogant, ignorant expression. He had heard enough. Among the onlookers, Senior Airman Garcia, who worked in aircraft maintenance, watched with growing unease. A history enthusiast, he knew the tail numbers and stories behind the wing's historically significant planes. When he noticed the elderly man standing by tail 780618, wearing a non-standard Scorpion patch, a piece of old trivia from his technical training clicked. He didn't know the man's name, but he knew the legend of the pilot who had flown that Warthog, Deadeye. As Captain Davis puffed up and demanded a visitor's pass, Garcia quietly slipped from the crowd. He pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. He didn't call security, they would only escalate the situation. Instead, he contacted the one person who would understand the gravity of what was happening, Command Chief Master Sergeant Wallace, the wing's highest-ranking enlisted leader, a man who valued history over rank. The call connected on the second ring. "Chief Wallace? This is Senior Airman Garcia from the 355th AMXS, he said, voice low and urgent. He quickly explained the situation. "Sir, Captain Davis is confronting an elderly veteran by Warthog 618. He's being extremely disrespectful. The veteran is wearing a Sand Scorpion patch and he's standing by Deadeye's plane." Pause. Silence on the other end, broken only by the scrape of a chair and rustle of papers. Finally, the chief spoke, his tone sharp and stripped of any pleasantries. "What is the veteran's name, Airman?" "I don't know, Chief. The captain won't let anyone talk to him. He's treating him like a trespasser. Stay put. Do not engage. Do not let that captain move the veteran. I'm on my way, and I'm bringing the colonel." The line went dead. Garcia glanced back at the scene. Davis, encouraged by Roger's silence, was about to cross a line with no turning back. The tension was palpable. Help was arriving. Justice was coming. Inside the wing headquarters, Chief Wallace didn't knock. He barged into the office of Colonel Matt, the wing commander known for his calm and unshakable demeanor. Matt was mid-meeting with staff, reviewing logistics for an upcoming deployment. "Sir, you need to see this," Wallace said, his voice cutting through the discussion. He strode to the colonel's desk and flipped a laptop around, already open to a single web page. It was the base's digital historical archive, displaying a page on Operation Desert Storm. On the screen was a grainy, sun-bleached photo of a much younger pilot, grinning as he leaned against an A-10 fuselage. Beneath it was the name, Major Roger "Dead-Eye" Bentley. The profile listed his achievements, airframe A-10780618, and his last known status, retired, living locally. "Chief, what's the meaning of this?" the colonel asked, annoyance creeping into his voice at the interruption. "Airman Garcia just called from the flight line," Wallace explained. "Captain Davis is publicly harassing an elderly man he assumes is a civilian. That man is standing next to the very same Warthog. Garcia says he's wearing the non-regulation Sand Scorpion patch noted in the after-action reports." Colonel Matt's expression shifted rapidly, from irritation to confusion to dawning comprehension, and finally to deep, profound horror. He stared at the photo, then at Wallace. The color drained from his face. He knew the name. Every A-10 pilot knew it. Dead-Eye Bentley was a legend, a ghost of the war that had defined the Warthog's reputation. He had performed feats in that aircraft still studied as examples of tactical brilliance and raw courage at the Air Force Academy. "Get the command vehicle," Colonel Matt said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He was already on his feet, snatching his flight cap from the desk. The staff officers in the room. The crowd sat in stunned silence. "Tell the driver, no speed limits. And get me a direct line to the tower. I want that flight line cleared of all non-essential personnel," Captain Davis ordered. Back on the tarmac, he had reached the peak of his arrogance. Roger's quiet defiance had struck a nerve. Davis saw it as a final, obstinate act of disrespect. "All right, that's it. I've had enough of this game," Davis declared, addressing both Roger and the onlookers. "You refuse to identify yourself. You refuse to follow a lawful order to leave a restricted area. I have no choice." He motioned to two young airmen. "Go get security forces. Tell them we have a situation. A trespasser, possibly confused, who needs to be escorted off the base. And while you're at it," he added, his tone sharp with contempt, "tell them to have medical on standby. We may need to perform a mandatory evaluation." This threat marked a dangerous escalation. Davis wasn't just trying to remove a perceived nuisance anymore. He was threatening to strip Roger of his dignity, to have him forcibly removed and declared mentally unfit, all for standing near his own aircraft. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The scene had turned ugly, a public humiliation that felt fundamentally wrong. Roger finally met the captain's eyes. For the first time, Davis noticed something beyond Roger's calm patience. A spark of the fire that had forged a legend in the crucible of war. It was the same look that had unsettled enemy commanders and strengthened the resolve of men under his command. A look that clearly said, "You have made a grave mistake." At that precise moment, a deep, commanding siren cut through the air. It wasn't the familiar wail of a security cruiser. It was the authoritative alert of a command vehicle. Heads turned as a black SUV, emergency lights flashing, raced onto the tarmac at a forbidden speed. It skidded to a stop just yards from the A-10, sending a cloud of dust into the air. A maintenance truck screeched to halt directly behind it. The SUV doors flew open. Colonel Matt emerged, his face a mask of controlled rage. He didn't glance at the crowd. His eyes scanned the scene, found Roger Bentley, and locked onto him. Chief Wallace followed half a step behind, accompanied by a team of senior maintenance personnel. NCOs moved with a disciplined urgency that made it clear a significant event was unfolding. The murmuring crowd fell into a hushed, reverent silence. Captain Davis stared, mouth slightly open, struggling to comprehend the scene. He had called for police to remove an elderly man, yet instead, the top leadership of the base arrived with the intensity of responding to a four-alarm fire. It was overwhelming. Colonel Matt strode past Davis as though he were invisible. He did not stop, speak, or acknowledge him. His attention was fully on the old man in the leather jacket. Matt approached Roger directly, stopping exactly 3 feet in front of him, and drew himself to his full height. Then, in a gesture that stunned the assembled airmen, Colonel Matt, the wing commander overseeing thousands of personnel and a fleet of deadly aircraft, executed the most precise and rigid salute Captain Davis had ever seen. It was not the casual gesture exchanged between officers. It radiated profound, almost reverential respect. "Mr. Bentley," the colonel's voice rang out across the silent tarmac, clear and commanding, "it is an honor to have you on my flight line, sir." Roger Bentley met the colonel's gaze, noted the silver eagle on his collar, and gave a slow, weary nod. The salute was held, then Matt dropped it and finally looked at Captain Davis. The expression he gave was not anger, but cold, focused disappointment. Turning to address the crowd, his voice carried the full weight of command. "For those unaware," he began, his tone resolute, "you are standing in the presence of Major Roger Bentley, United States Air Force retired, though he would never boast of it himself." He gestured to the A-10 behind Roger. "This is not just any Warthog. This is Tail 780618, his aircraft." Major Bentley, then known as Deadeye Bentley, flew this exact plane for over 2,000 hours, nearly half in combat. A ripple of awe swept through the crowd. The airman who had slouched in discomfort now stood upright, eyes wide with disbelief and growing reverence. During Operation Desert Storm, the colonel continued, voice rising, Major Bentley was credited with the confirmed destruction of 23 T-72 tanks, 16 armored personnel carriers, and more than 30 artillery pieces, more enemy armor than any other pilot in the theater. He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle, then pointed to the faded scorpion patch on Roger's jacket. "And this patch, Captain Davis, is not from a bingo team," he said. "It was awarded by the commander of the 3rd Ranger Battalion, following a mission where Major Bentley, flying this plane, single-handedly engaged and destroyed an entire enemy mechanized company that had ambushed a platoon of Army Rangers. He saved every single one of them. He did this after taking a missile hit to his starboard engine and flew the aircraft back to base with half a wing on fire and hundreds of shrapnel holes in the fuselage. He refused to eject because he had been worried the plane might crash into a nearby civilian village." The story lingered in the air, a quiet but powerful testament to the unassuming man standing before them. The crowd was silent. The young airman stared at Roger as if seeing him for the first time, not as an old man, but as the living symbol of a legacy they had only read about in history books. Colonel Matt then fixed his full, piercing gaze on the pale, trembling Captain Davis. "Captain," he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening tone, more intimidating than a shout ever could. "You will report to my office tomorrow at 0600 hours, in your service dress uniform. You will be prepared to explain in detail why you thought it acceptable to humiliate a decorated hero of the United States Air Force. You will account for your complete failure in leadership, judgment, and basic human decency. You will justify why you still deserve the right to wear that uniform because from where I'm standing, you have profoundly disgraced it today. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Colonel," Davis whispered, his voice barely audible. Matt then turned back to Roger, his expression softening immediately. "Sir, on behalf of the entire wing, I offer my deepest apologies for the disrespect shown to you today." Roger Bentley finally spoke, his voice steady and calm, carrying a quiet authority that drew everyone's attention. "He's young, Colonel. All he sees is the uniform, the rank, the rules of the present. He doesn't see the man who wore it long ago. He looks at this airplane and sees only an old, obsolete machine. He doesn't recognize the history etched into its metal, the lives it carried, or the people it saved on the ground." His gaze moved past the colonel to the young airman. "Respect isn't about saluting the man in front of you. It's about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before. Without that memory, the uniform is just a costume." As he spoke of memory, a single image flashed vividly in his mind, not fire and combat, but of the quiet aftermath. He remembered himself much younger, standing on the flight line at a Saudi Arabian desert base beside his battered, smoking A-10. A young army captain, his face streaked with grime and tears of relief, pressed a small hand-stitched patch into his hand, the scorpion patch. "We wouldn't be here without you, sir," the ranger said, his voice thick with an emotion words could not capture. "The men wanted you to have this. You're one of us now. You're a sand scorpion." The patch was not a mere decoration. It was a contract, a symbol of lives saved and a debt that could never truly be repaid, but one that would always be remembered. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of that day on the flight line were swift and clear. Captain Davis was formally reprimanded and quietly reassigned to a dull desk job at a remote logistics command. His promising career as a pilot was effectively over. Colonel Matt, keeping his word, launched a mandatory professional development course for all officers in the wing, focusing entirely on Air Force heritage, opening each session with the story of Major Roger Bentley and Tail 780618. The wing also dedicated the aircraft, mounting a gleaming bronze plaque beneath the cockpit, honoring the heroic service of both the plane and its legendary pilot. The base issued a formal apology to Roger, which he accepted with quiet grace. He sought no fanfare or ceremony, the acknowledgement alone was sufficient. About a month later, Roger sat in a small off-base coffee shop, reading the morning paper. The bell above the door jingled, and a man in civilian clothes entered, shoulders slumped, face weary. It was the former Captain Davis. Roger froze momentarily, then watched as the man hesitated before approaching his table. He stood awkwardly, uncertain what to say. Roger looked up, expression neutral, waiting. Finally, Davis spoke, his voice quiet, stripped of its former arrogance. "Sir, I know an apology isn't enough, but I wanted you to know they had me read your entire service record. Every mission report, every citation. I just wanted to say thank you for your service." It was not the groveling apology Roger might have expected. It was something far better, a statement of understanding, a lesson painfully learned. Roger Bentley simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and closure, before returning to his paper. After a moment, the younger man turned and left. On the flight line, Airman Garcia would often take new mechanics to Tail 780618. He would point to the plaque, then to the faint, almost invisible scorch marks still visible on the right engine if the light caught them just right. And he would tell the story of the day a living legend returned to visit his old warhorse and reminded an entire base what true valor looks like. If this story of quiet courage and earned respect moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who honors our veterans, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of the unassuming heroes among us.